I have something that I'd like to do the work on, and I started in written form a few nights ago. Um, but I guess I'm also open to your guidance, Todd, because I find that I have resistance. Also, it's a moment from about 2 years ago when my middle son was in a really, really challenged state and had some huge behaviors, and it's kind of like one of my hardest memories. And the thought is about my husband, that he should have stayed to help me with our son that day. um, and I could just try to do the work on it, but what I notice also is that oh gosh, I just have some resistance to letting go of this thought. I know that it's sort of in my way, and I don't want this to be a painful memory, but I find that I'm like holding it as kind of like fuel against my partner at times. Like, that time that you left me was so painful, like, I don't know. I both want to let it go, but then I find that something in me is like really clinging to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, so I don't know what you think is it the best way just to kind of step in and see what happens in it, or am I like pushing myself to let go of something, that sometimes I find that I'm like trying to whip myself into shape or something.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't want to be forceful, and
Yeah.
I'm curious what you think.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Thanks for sharing those thoughts about it, because that is really important. What do they say about, I don't remember the exact phrase, but like for teachers, receptivity is everything when it comes to teaching, and not that we're teaching it ourselves, but if there's a part of us that's not receptive, how can we even begin any kind of even inquiry in that case? So yes, I think both options are still possible, because the work is a gentle process and can allow you to go at your own pace, the pace of that part that resists as well. So you could just go into the work. But another option could be to look at the resistance itself. Like, what is that resistance? Like you said, it's like a fuel against your partner. You can use that moment as like as a as a fuel. Like, okay, so like, um, what are your wants or needs around that?
Mhm.
Or why do you need that, like, yeah, why do you need to hold on to that? Why do you need that fuel? Or yeah, just what are your wants and needs? Just
Yeah.
brainstorm a little bit.
Why do I want him to be wrong?
Hmm.
Hmm. I guess I want him to. Gosh, I want him to admit that he was wrong. I want him to like fully own that I got put in this impossible situation. Um, yeah, some part of me feels like he didn't recognize that. Gosh, what is it? There's like kind of even a more general, just wanting him to really acknowledge my experience. Like, this is like sort of in general. This is like it comes up a lot in our relationship that think he hasn't fully recognized things that were really painful for me or that I felt um, really alone in. So it's like, I don't know, I'm still kind of keeping a score and it feels a bit protective. Like, if I just forgive this one, I don't know, I guess I feel like, oh, it'll just keep happening.
Mm. Yeah. So that would certainly make some resistance, right? If I forgive this one, it'll just keep happening.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts that come up in this resistance feeling to doing this work?
Well, I feel what it feels just kind of like this huge ego energy that is like, look, I've dealt with the hardest moments and I've like been in it like physically with this child and I've like, and it's not that he hasn't, but there's something in me. There were several times where I felt really left unprotected.
Mm.
And I just like, I guess for some reason I just don't want to let it go, but I realize that I it keeps me feeling vulnerable and like a victim, and I don't it's like I don't like this story, but
Mm.
I find it hard to let go of, and I just feel some like, oh, it'd be good for me to look back at that moment again and see it differently. And I don't know, then there's just this resentful part of me that's like, don't let go of it. And it's I feel the same thing towards some of the adults involved in that really hard time my kid went through at school that year when he was kept out of school. And I feel the same thing, like, I don't want to forgive those people. I don't want to look at my part. I've looked at my part a crap ton. And but I'm just like kind of keeping myself in this whole story of me being wronged. And I feel
Yeah.
how it doesn't serve me, and yet it's hard to it's hard to really like step into inquiry with an open mind, or like with a willingness to be shown something different.
Yeah. Yeah. Basically, like if you forgive them, like what are you afraid? Like why do you not want to forgive them? What are you afraid will happen if you forgive them? What are your Why are you attached to not forgiving them?
Like they'll just think that wasn't a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And we went through like, a couple years of like really big deals.
Right.
Like, with a kid who was really unstable. And yeah, why? Somehow I just like still really want to be acknowledged for the pain that it was. And even though it's a lot less now, just it's still painful for me. And
Yeah. Okay.
yeah,
So I took a few notes as you were talking, and I think we may have some possible statements that you could question that have to do with this resistance to it. And so let me read a few and just tell me if any of them sound
Okay.
like something you'd like to question or feel like they're getting close to what you were feeling. So I want him to admit he was wrong. I want him to fully own that I got put in this impossible situation. He didn't recognize that. I want him to acknowledge my experience. I want him to fully recognize what was really painful for me. Uh, if I forgive this one, it will just keep happening. Uh, he left me unprotected, or I was left unprotected. I don't, uh, uh, yeah, if I forgive him, he'll think it wasn't a big deal. And I want to be acknowledged for the pain that it was.
I think if I forgive him, he'll think it wasn't a big deal. Because
Okay.
I feel that for this situation, but I also feel it for that school director and that other mom, and that, like, it's that it applies to kind of all of these pieces of this story that I am having a hard time questioning or being open to.
Okay. Okay. So the thing to notice about these thoughts, these thoughts about these resistance thoughts to even doing the work on the actual situation are the thoughts that give the experience of it not being safe to do the work, right? Like that's it's not safe because if I forgive him, then he's just not going to think it's a big deal. So
Mhm.
this is like a layer above the core issue, but it's like also an issue. And it has to be like I have to have a safe container for myself to do the work, even if I'm just doing it with myself, before I can go in there. Otherwise, I will be in resistance.
Yeah.
Okay, so would you like to do the work on this?
Yeah. Yeah, I would. I'm just noticing, like, oh, there's a lot. I've have a whole handful of situations where I feel the same thought with school director's wife, and this other parent or whatever who try to be friendly with me, and I'm like, ooh, I don't want to be friends with you.
Yeah.
Like, it's we're still going through hard things, and yeah. But okay, so I could do that thought on Scott. Yeah, yeah, I can do that.
Okay. And keep in mind that you can do the same, you can question the same statement with other people about this same situation or about other situations. It's like sort of another way of starting doing the work. You can just dive right in, or you can look at your resistance to diving in and question those thoughts before even beginning to do the rest of the work.
Yeah.
And each situation will be different. Just because you may work through it with your thoughts about Scott, it may the thoughts about someone else may still stand there, and you may have to go through this same questioning about them to find the specific examples that make sense with that person.
So the thought was, if I forgive him,
He'll think it wasn't a big deal.
yeah, right. Okay.
Okay, so is that true? If you do this work on the situation with your son and the pain that you went through and start forgiving him, then he'll think it wasn't a big deal. Is it true?
Yes.
And can you absolutely know it's true that if you forgive him, he'll think it wasn't a big deal?
No.
So, how do you react? What happens when you believe this, or a part of you believes this, that if you forgive him, he'll think it wasn't a big deal?
I feel just a lot of tension, like a knot in my stomach, but also just my shoulders and arms. And like, I just feel really braced for anything. I feel super defensive. I mean, it's similar to that moment that I was in with a kid, like throwing punches and sharp rocks and wielding big tree branches and like I feel just super on guard. Yeah, just really charged, really like, I mean, ready to fight back. If he even,
Sorry.
that's fine. If he like, if he denies anything or if he misrepresents my experience, or this all like, imagine that we're having a conversation or something and he forgot that or didn't think it was that bad or didn't remember part of it, which is kind of a common experience too. I'm just gonna lose my shit on him. Yeah, I just feel so much energy in me, so much like could just really mess someone up right now. Feel so, yeah, I guess I feel redundant, but I'm just, there's so much tension and so much charge that I just can't. I mean, I can't really think much else. Like my mind's just not. It's not open. It's not curious. It's like I really just have like one one focus, and that's like to show him or to prove to him that he really fucked that up. That he like that he could never make that right. That he put someone else's kid at risk. That he like that it was just like such a worst moment.
Yeah. And then when you think in another part of yourself of doing the work on that situation, when he didn't, he didn't stay to help, then what happens when you think of doing the work, for example, and you're thinking, if I forgive him, he'll think it wasn't a big deal.
There's just like this force field in my chest that just really can't even go near it. Just like that's not what's needed here. For me to take another look at my experience, that's not. It's. I mean, I really feel like that's not going to help, or like that's not going to help us. Even though I feel how trapped I am, like holding this thought, but it doesn't make me hate the work or anything. It just feels like a repellent. Like I just back back away.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of have this story like I've done so much of my work. I've like worked my way through this whole shitty 2 years of blah blah blah. I have this rant that I
Mhm.
have done my part, and so like anything left over is just somebody else's problem.
Right.
I mean, I know that's not true when I say it, but I feels true.
Well, this is why I love that you brought up that resistance right from the get go, because it's it's there. That force field is there. How can how can I possibly sit quietly and find answers and challenge my own belief system, which is what we do here, if I'm resisting that, right? And that resistance is coming from a different thought, which is it's like a combination lock. I have to unlock the first lock before I can go in and unlock the second lock. So, okay, I think it's clear how you react when you think if you forgive him, he'll think it wasn't a big deal. It's that, yeah.
Mm.
So, who would you be without the thought? If you forgive him, he'll think it wasn't a big deal. If you didn't think that was true, who would you be?
Mm. Gosh, there's something I feel some kind of different sensation in my chest and my throat, and it's like seeing a light at the end of a tunnel, or more like seeing a candle in a dark space or something. And I just feel kind of like guided towards that. Like without the thought, I feel, I mean, I'm able to breathe and I have this a bit of space and just like a bit of a focus. Um, like it feels like reassurance, like, okay, just you can do your work and then see what comes next. There's not a big expectation. So it's like trusting in an unknown, but I can feel the kind of settled sense of trust in it. And my mind opens to this possibility that as I do my work, it doesn't without, if I don't believe that it means he's not going to think it's a big deal, I can imagine if I do my work, he might be able to really hear from me what a big deal it was if I can describe that better. Or if I, like I'll be able to speak to things better, him and other people, when I'm not so charged,
Mm.
when I'm not so defensive. And yeah, God, that fits with Scott, and it fits with all of the others that I'm thinking of too. Because when I see the other people, I just kind of clam up, like, God, I don't even want to get started, because I feel kind of like a floodgate. Without the thought, I can imagine, I can feel into, maybe the story isn't any different. Like maybe what I what I want to say about that situation or the general situation or situations at school. What I want to say is still, it's still the same, but I can say it in a way that feels like I have my my faculties. Like I can really pinpoint with clarity what was so painful. And yeah, it's like actually this is a way through for me to be able to do that. It's not like to make me give up my story. Yeah. Gosh, I didn't see that. It's like this is what I need to do to be able to tell my story.
Mm. Wow.
Hmm. Yeah, that really helps. It makes me really curious to see like, well, what would happen if I did my work on that moment? If I don't believe that like I have to get rid of my story to move on and evolve and be enlightened from that moment,
Yeah.
like if I can keep it all but just feel more clarity in it, that is like that's all the difference.
Yeah. Exactly.
Mm, that's a real relief to see that. Yeah.
So, how would you turn this thought around? If you forgive him, he'll think it wasn't a big deal.
Mm. If I forgive him, he'll think it was a big deal.
Okay. How could that possibly be true?
Well, when he doesn't feel that energy from me and when I'm not communicating in that way that is so defensive and like kind of like with such a wall up, he won't kind of, we won't do our thing, which is then he gets defensive and like, kind of hides and can't even find his words to speak to something. And we just won't go down that path that we do, that pattern that we run. Yeah, when I come from a really clear place, he can hear it. And he can believe it when he's not tripped into his own defense. Yeah, that seems true of everybody pretty much.
Yeah. Something about when someone is really vulnerable and just sharing honestly their truth, we really see what a big deal it
Yeah,
was. Like it's like, wow, that must have been
right.
really hard for you.
Yeah, but when I want to rough everybody up, they just don't want to.
Yeah. It's like, okay, well, you want to fight? Well, I'll fight too, right?
I'm like ready to tear them apart. I mean, not really, but it's kind of the energy that I carry.
Yeah. It's like
Yeah, for
the
real.
energy of like fighting, an energy of defense and being, trying to force them to see it somehow, and then they get defensive, as opposed to the energy of almost inviting them into this scary part inside that,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
So interesting. If you forgive him, ironic as it sounds now, if you forgive him, he will think it was a big deal. It's quite possible.
Yeah.
More, he may think it's a big deal more than if you don't forgive him, which is where we started.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm pretty sure of that.
Cool. So, what's another turnaround? If you forgive him, he'll think it wasn't a big deal.
This is a little tricky because there's kind of a lot of different ways to go, but
Mm-hmm.
if I forgive him, I'll think it wasn't a big deal. Is that a
Mm-hmm.
turn?
Yeah, it's a turnaround. I mean, we can play with it. May make sense. It may not make sense. But is there anything that this particular perspective might
Yeah.
any light it might shed on this?
Yeah, sometimes like situations are hard and I'm like holding it against Scott. And then I do my work and I see like, okay, well that wasn't actually really his fault. And the thing itself was still a big deal, but I'm just not blaming him, or I'm just, he's not implicated in my mind anymore. So I can just kind of let that part of it go. Like that moment was still totally terrifying and it wasn't Scott's fault.
Yeah,
For whatever reason, that's how life worked it out, that I was left alone on the side of the mountain with this kid just losing it. And it's just not an issue it's not a big deal between me and Scott that happened. It's a big deal to me that it happened.
that's really cool because it brings it down to size a little bit. Like you know how it's it has a certain size to it, but then the mind will bring him into it to make it even bigger,
Yeah.
and that may not be that may not be accurate or necessary. And then you can just deal with the size of it, how it actually is.
Yeah. And I just don't need like one more thing in my list of issues with my partner. I've got
Exactly.
I've got plenty to draw on, that I haven't worked, and it'd be nice just not to add this one to the list,
Mhm.
because when I
Mhm.
do, go there in my mind, like, oh yeah, and he left me in that situation. It's just like, God, this guy's impossible. I could never forgive him.
Yeah.
The list is so long, but
And
I'll
another
just take
thing, and
that one
another
out.
thing.
But
And that's how it blows up, right? That's how the mind works. It takes one
yeah,
small thing happens and then it's like, oh yeah, and that reminds me of another and another and
yeah,
another. And pretty
right,
soon I'm like, I'm out of here, you know?
right,
So
yep.
yeah,
Yeah, so if I forgive him, I'll think it wasn't a big deal between us. Yeah. Or, it's like it's still its own thing, but it's not between us in that
yeah,
same way.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's my experience doing the work over the years on almost anything is that it just brings it down a little bit. Like it is over whatever deal it was, but the mind tends to exaggerate. So it just, the exaggeration, as we question our thoughts, the exaggeration kind of withers and becomes just whatever it actually was.
Yeah.
And there may be many pieces to it, and it may, sometimes it just withers away completely. There's no big deal. And then that sounds far fetched at this particular moment, but there are probably other pieces keeping it um, inflated in the mind, and who knows, like if you, but case in point with him, we can at least leave that part out of it, right?
Yeah. Right. One less thing.
One less, yeah, one less.
That feels good.
Okay, any other turnaround? If I forgive him, he'll think it wasn't a big deal.
If I forgive me, I'll think it wasn't a big deal.
If, uh, yeah,
Is that
possible.
like a turnaround to the self? Just take him out of it. And
Give it a try. We can always try.
I mean, gosh, just when I said it a minute ago, I had this just kind of flash of like, wow, yeah, if I forgive me and Scott and everybody, then it's just like, whew, that thing happened. It's like, I know I've come to this in the turnarounds when I do the work on my son, but it's like, it was a wild animal encounter, like, oh my God, we put a cougar on the trail and he was all claws. And
And he was
I,
your son.
and it's true. Then there were sharp rocks and very sharp sticks, and the kid was out of control. And it went on for some time, and it involved another kid, and it was like it was a mess. But it's like, okay, we all made it out safely. It just it like just comes down to that, like, wow, that was something we all came through. And when I forgive everyone, it's there's just like there's no one to blame. Saw a wild animal. It's a narrow escape. We get in the car and we're like, oh my God, that what a relief. And
Right.
it's there's I mean, honestly, when I've had encounters with animals too, it's there's some kind of just like deep appreciation for forces of nature and the realization even that like, wow, I'm just not always we're not always safe and we're not always in control, and we can encounter a lot in life that's just like bigger forces than us and we don't even know how to handle it. And my experience is that life just somehow gets us through. I mean, because here I am, and
Right.
I've had other experiences with nature, not animals, but just like, oh my God, wow, we made that. I made it through that. And there's something that just feels like gratitude rather than like a score to keep or that shouldn't have happened or it's somebody's fault. It just is like, oh my God, when I think back to that, I'm just really glad that we're not in that kind of place, that we're not dealing with that anymore. And it's like, yeah, I just feel a whole wash of gratitude at the memory of it. Like it, even just before doing this work, I was like, I don't even want to think about that. When I think about that, my stomach's in knots. It was just such a horrible situation. And right now I can feel like, whew, I'm so grateful to look back on that and see that we're not in that. Yeah, we've like come through something and whatever, the kid's 13. We have a lot. There's a lot of time ahead, but we're not in the situations that we were. Yeah, that feels great.
That's cool. Yeah. So any other turnaround, if there are any? If I forgive him, he'll think it wasn't a big deal.
What I don't see one, do you? Or I'm not sure where to go.
Possibly, if I don't forgive him, he'll think it was. He'll think it wasn't a big deal.
If I don't forgive him.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. Do you see how that is true?
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's not as clear as the first turnaround we did, but I think it's similar. Something like if I don't forgive him, then I'm full of anger or something at him, and then he won't have a chance to see what a big deal it was, like to really see what I went through because he'll be so busy defending and
Yeah.
feeling, just
Yeah.
yeah, like that.
Yeah. Totally. Because then he's feeling, I mean, similar to what I felt, which is like totally unprotected.
Yeah,
Yeah. Then I become that angry, dangerous wild
exactly.
animal
He's
for
too
sure.
busy defending his own
Right. It's
safety
just like,
to
yikes, my
listen
wife.
to you. Yeah, he can't even hear about your vulnerability here because right now there's an arrow and a spear coming his way.
That's totally true. That's totally true. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. So I
Yeah.
think
Really, the way for all of us through this is for me to get clear and just sort out
yeah.
what happened or to see it in a bigger perspective. Yeah. I could
And
feel that.
that's the only purpose of doing the work is for something inside of me to shift a bit, to be a little more relaxed inside, to see it as less of a big deal, possibly. It's like for my own inner experience. And then that naturally may start to be communicated, but it's like the they're just two separate things, right? It's just, yeah, I don't need to say it any more than what we've just seen here. It's so clear. Yeah. When I'm angry, the other person naturally keeps a distance instead of when
Yeah.
I'm more quiet, they're going to be able to see what I went through and maybe even be understanding.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Todd.
Yeah, thank you for your work. Really, really good. So that's like the first combination lock there. And then if you
Yeah.
if you like, and you were also kind of touching on the inner combination lock, which was, that your partner should have stayed to help you, but it might be still good to go in and look at that piece of work if you're feeling open to it at some point.
Yeah. I am now. I'm definitely more curious. Like, oh gosh, what would I find? You
Yeah.
know?
And I think the takeaway for all of us is just that resistance has to be respected. Like, I can't just push through resistance on this kind of inner work. It's resistance has something to say. And if I listen to it, it shows me actually the most direct way to my peace. If I fight against it or try to push through, I'm going to end up getting into that force field you described, and then I'm going to get pushed right out
Yeah.
of there and I'm going to get frustrated. So I have to pay attention to the actual stress that I'm feeling and follow the lead where that stress is pointing. Even if it looks like it's in the opposite direction, that might be the most direct path. So thank you for
Yeah.
trusting that.
Mm. Yeah. Thanks for your insight. That's just what I needed.
Welcome.